So I was a very artistic kid. Like I like baking, I like drawing, like theater, all those things. Like anything creative and artistic, I really liked it. But where I was from, like that wasn't really acceptable. And then you see that because you're all compiled in schools, right? So kids say things, right? And it's not that kids are bad, but it's like this is what's set up. So you don't have that freedom to really be yourself.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Building Men podcast. Become the strongest version of yourself, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. I'm honored today to be joined by author Brandon Robinson. Brandon is an author that uses poetry as a tool of expression. His book, When Words Won't Form, My Pen Speaks, is available now, and we'll talk a little bit about it today during the interview. Brandon is from Detroit, Michigan, and I'm going to start there. Brandon, first of all, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being on the Building Men podcast, my man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I mentioned we met each other about 10 minutes ago. And as soon as we started, I said, I feel like I know you. When you follow along on someone's journey via social media or following them on their website, you feel this deep connection with that person. And so as soon as you popped on my screen, I felt like we had known each other already because you have spoken to me many times in different areas of my life. So I feel like I knew you already.
Yeah, same here. I've watched your videos and I'm like, oh yeah, I know him.
There's that guy. All right. So you grew up in Detroit, and initially, we started talking as well. I was like, were you a basketball guy? Were you a basketball fan? Because a big part of my upbringing was watching NBA basketball in the late 80s and early 90s, and that was kind of in your wheelhouse. You're growing up in Detroit, and the city is influenced by this team, right? So talk to us
Right.
a little bit about what you remember about that team from the 80s, because I'll weave that into a discussion just about growing up in school.
Yeah, so I was pretty young. Well, when they won, I think I was like close to being like 9 or 10. But I remember every day watching, what we would do. Me and my dad would watch the games. Like I mean, like regular season games. Like we would watch them play the playoffs. And I still remember when they actually won the championship, like going down there, driving around downtown. I think I fell asleep like as soon as the cold air hit me, but I can say I was there. But I mean, they really represented what the city was, right? Hard work, drive, tenacity. Um, that was Detroit, like blue collar, like it's
Yes.
nothing like extremely flashy. And I think that's why the NBA really didn't really embrace the Pistons because it was, you had the um, I forget what the Lakers like thing was, whatever it was, but you had them like the Hollywood aspect
Oh yeah.
of it. Then you had Boston, which was like America's team, right? Then you got this gritty bunch of people over in Detroit, and people are like, "Oh, they play dirty," and I'm like, first of all, none of y'all had to watch the series between the Celtics and the Pistons because the Celtics basically taught the Pistons how to do that. Like they used to, I mean, go back and watch those finals and watch how like the Celtics would like foul the life out of everybody, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think that's why people didn't like the Pistons, man, because we disrupted the flow, right? Like think about it, like the Celtics and the Lakers essentially owned the '80s, right? Like they were in the playoffs, like in the finals maybe 8 times. So that's a lot.
Absolutely. And I think too, when you think about Dennis Rodman and Bill Laimbeer and Isaiah Thomas, that whole group, Vinny the Microwave Johnson,
Right.
those guys were they embodied that physicality part of sports. I have a 16-year-old son now, and when we watched the Jordan documentary, which was just amazing, for those of you that haven't seen it, you have to watch that documentary. Get such a
I'm
true
not a Jordan
appreciation.
fan, so I didn't watch it.
You know what? They do a nice job. Really, you understand. You won't do it. I get it, Chicago.
Yeah.
I get
Like
it.
I'm a true bad boys Pistons guy. We're not watching, so I'm not watching.
But what was cool about it was they really dived deep into the Pistons. There was always that changing of the guard that happened in the NBA. Like it passed from the Lakers to the Celtics to the Pistons to the Bulls finally. But the way
Right.
that Detroit operated, you can't play basketball like that anymore. I watch it with my son, and I was like, look at how physical the game was, and that's how I grew up playing. I miss that physicality part of
Yeah.
it. You know, there's the game, it requires a ton of skill, right? But I do think it's become a
Right.
little soft in nature, I'd say.
More finesse, right? Yeah, it's more finesse.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, if that's the area, that's the time frame that both you and I are growing up in, where that is the norm in society. It's like that, hardworking, blue collar. You go to work, you do your job, you put your head down, and I'll wrap it into just a discussion about
Mhm.
feeling the ability as as you're growing up to be able to express yourself, to feel into emotions, and to truly understand that. I grew up in a spot where my father was a blue collar worker. He owned a business. He worked his ass off, but it wasn't a whole lot of emotion being expressed. I remember spending time with my father, but I don't remember those conversations about emotion at all. I
Mhm.
remember even when my grandfather died, I was young. I was 7 years old when my grandfather died. And when my father told me, it was more just a matter of fact. There was no emotion expressed. So for me, I always pushed emotion down when I
Mhm.
was younger. And it turned into me pushing emotion down as an adult. So take
Yeah.
us back to your experience in school. One of the things that you say as part of your bio was that you learned to not show emotion and not talk too much. So now
Right.
you're growing up in Detroit, which is this stoic kind of like you go, you put your head down, you go to work, and then you're growing up in a time spot where you think that's just the way I'm supposed to be. So talk to us a little bit about your experience in school and why you think that's the case.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say I love the city. The city of Detroit was an amazing experience growing up. I think it's very unique in what it offers. Detroit people go all over the world, and we still have tremendous pride in our city. Um, Now, where I grew up at was at the time, everything's normal to you, but it was a little bit of a tougher neighborhood, right? So growing up, in the city around those times, whether it was in school or not, like there was a natural guard that you had to have up, right? You couldn't be. So I was a very artistic kid. Like I like baking, I like drawing, like theater, all those things, like anything creative and artistic, I really liked it. But where I was from, like that wasn't really acceptable. And then you see that because you're all compiled in schools, right? So kids say things, right? And it's not that kids are bad, but it's like this is what's set up. So you don't have that freedom to really be yourself, right? Because you look around, you say, oh, this isn't really acceptable, right? Like, I can't be like this smiling, happy person when everybody's looking over their shoulder, right? Like when people are struggling, or things like that. So for me, I learned early on, like you have to like guard yourself. You gotta, you gotta be on your guard, right? Like, and where I'm from, when you smiled, it was a sign of weakness. So like you didn't see a lot of dudes smiling. Like, and maybe you cracking jokes, yeah, but you didn't walk around and just do this. Like, it was a sign of weakness, and it invited like people to like basically either fight you, take advantage, or whatever. So imagine growing up with that. Like you talking about repressing emotions. Like I can't even be happy now because it's like, what I'm saying. But like that's how it was taught, and that's kind of like codes and rules, right? So you could like you said, like you couldn't say too much, right? Like because people didn't talk about how they feel. Like our parents probably, they came from a different era, right? Like so if we thought we had it bad, like they didn't even get what we got, right?
Right,
Like it
right.
was just like go to work and do that. And like I gave you some food and now go do this. And so like you, I spent time with my dad, but we didn't have that deep connection because I feel like to no fault of his own, I don't think he had that with his family. So you can't give what you haven't had. And so
And
that's what I feel like, yeah, for me, I couldn't, it was couldn't express myself because one, it wasn't taught, but I also see like it wasn't taught to them either.
right. So Brandon, you're walking around and understanding like you have to look over both shoulders. It's more
Right.
of this survival mode that you're
Yeah,
in, survival of the
absolutely.
fittest. And to be able to walk down the street and survive, you have to suppress a lot of the things that are going on
Right.
internally. So you're a creative person, you want to draw, you want to write, you want to act, but you're like, if I do that, one, the way my boys look at me is not going to be the same. They're going to
Yeah.
label me as such and such. And then just the neighborhood where you live, there was probably there was probably a level of fear there. So
Yeah.
how do you go about meeting that need? So do you just push it down and just don't deal with it, or when you go home, do you journal, do you write, do you draw, do you create? Are you getting that need met in any way,
As a
understanding that
kid,
once you leave the door, you got to put on a mask?
you talking about as a kid?
Yeah.
I didn't do it at all. Like I did a little bit, but not for real. I mean, I just didn't do it. Like I just thought, like, all right, I can't really, I drew some, but not a lot. And I didn't really start writing until I was older. But like I wanted to, I used to do plays. I was in gymnastics. I wanted to be in the glee club. Like some of those things, I didn't do because I was like, all right, this ain't something I can do. So
What
I
was
just
the
did.
turning point then? When did it turn for you? What do you remember the moment where you said, "Okay, I'm going to kind of break out of the shell and be the person that I want to be, not worrying about what other people were thinking"?
It wasn't childhood. Yeah, I did. My whole childhood, I was like that. So I ain't gonna sit up here and tell some people like, oh, when I hit like 14, nah. When I was an adult, like
Okay.
that's just basically when I was an adult, like it started to happen. Like I found faith at about 18, and that kind of put me on the journey toward that. Like so, my faith and being a Christian really opened doors. Um, and as I did that, like even then, I still like had that like suppressed emotion and still didn't have that comfort. So I'll say after I got divorced, that's what really put me on the pathway to kind of like really do like more introspective reflection, self-discovery. And fast forward, I started becoming, as I started to do that work, I started to be more, comfortable with just who I was.
I would love to talk to you about going through a divorce. It's something that I just recently went through as well. But I wanted to just make sure that going through school, I'm such a
Right.
student of what schools do well and conversely what schools really need to work on. And I think there's a
Mhm.
lot of areas for improvement with schools. So based on your experience in education, if you were to go back and kind of recreate that experience for someone coming after you, how would you make school different to better serve people that are coming now through school?
Yeah. So, you know, it's tough because I'm older now, right? So if you ask a younger me, I don't know what I would have given you as an answer, but like as somebody who's like 40 and more so established, I think that schools could do a better job of really. And some of this is so. First of all, you got to partner with parents, right? And parents have to partner with education. So this isn't all on schools. Like sometimes we expect schools to be parents, and that's not their job, right? Like so I'm not saying that, but I think they could do a better job of not just teaching a curriculum, but like teaching towards strengths of students. I've heard some really creative things that people do, right, where they allow students to really kind of like pick like paths and go down that path. Like I think that's even better because that way you're honing and strengthening your talents and abilities and gifts, right? Instead of just doing like civics and social studies and math, right? Like while those things are important, there's still elements that we can really pour into while we're learning those things too. So I would do more of that approach.
If your school really focused in on that and they really focused in on building community with the students and helping people understand that everyone was probably thinking the same way you were in some respect. I wish I could just fucking smile. I wish I could just do that. I wish there was a space for me to just go and shed all this
Right.
shit and take off the mask. If
Yeah.
your school really focused on that, do you think it could have made a difference, or do you think that the streets where you were just it was locked down in such a way that there wasn't that opportunity?
Yeah, I think for the school system, that's so first of all, like that was society at large. So this is such a big problem for like that would have been one pillar of it, but it would have had to be like the home, the neighborhood, like businesses. Like at that point, it would have had to be like a collective group effort. So I think that while a school could have had an impact, I think that you would have needed a collective, because if you look at the collective change we've seen towards like mental health and dealing with trauma, like it's addressed at the corporate level, it's addressed at the political level, it's addressed at the religious level, it's addressed, from the athletic level. It's at every level, and it did all of that to make it socially acceptable, and it took all of that. So we would have needed that same pushback then.
It's almost like there's a proverb: the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today.
Yeah,
And if you start with the schools, maybe there's this grassroots groundswell of change that might happen. So now you go through your experience in elementary and middle school, but then you get to high school and you're an athlete. And
Right.
the sport of choice for you was football, and you were a middle linebacker.
Yep.
Or you're a linebacker playing football, right? So I
Yep.
want
Middle linebacker. Yeah, you had it right.
got it. And you got the build of a middle linebacker. You got that. And plus you're the quarterback on the defense. You have to see things in a certain way, and being able to express yourself probably served you well as the quarterback of the defense.
Hmm.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
so now you have this creative side of you that you've had to kind of push down for years, but then there's also this aggressive side to you that you need to be successful as a middle linebacker. So you have that dichotomy of both things that are, it's like the yin and the
Yeah.
yang
Yeah.
happening internally with you. So talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about your experience. I'm fascinated with people that played high school and then college sports, and you went on to play college linebacker. Talk to me a little bit about your experience first in high school. What do you recall playing football in high school?
I loved it. I loved every aspect of it. It was, for me, it gave me a healthy outlet. I could hit people when I get in trouble. I love the collision, the contact, the camaraderie, being part of something, the drive, the discipline. Like, football, I loved it. Like, it just was a great experience. Like, building like relationships, lifelong. I mean, at the time, like I played little league too, but I didn't know it at the time. But some of these would be lifelong bonds. Um, but I love contact. I mean, you could just being able to sit there, dissect an offense, knowing what they're going to do, and then just do it. Like, to me, like, there's a knowledge of the game, right? There's ability and there's knowledge of the game. Like, so when you combine those two, right? Like, even though we're not talking about it, like, look at like a LeBron, right? Like, look at his mental IQ. Like, when you see certain people, like, their ability to dissect plays before they happen, like, that is what makes you great. And then you match that with physical ability, and now you got an elite athlete. So
My son is 16, I mentioned, and he is the quarterback of the football team. He actually started as a freshman, which was watching him, and he wasn't super big yet. He grew, but looking him out there, it would scare the shit out of me as a father. He was 14 years old, and there's kids that are 17, 18 wanting to take his head off. Like, if you saw him out there, you'd be like, I am gonna, you know, wreck this kid. He's mine. And I'm seeing as a dad, but what I told him, I would say his name is Dennis Jr. We call him Denny. I'd be like, Denny, like, listen, right now everything is moving so fast, but
right,
the more you understand, the stronger you get, the bigger you get, the more you go through it with repetition. What happens is you're moving at a faster pace, and the game starts to slow down. And you
mm-hmm.
start to see things happening in a different way. It's almost like the Matrix, as Neo stops the bullets in the middle, and he
Yes,
can pick them out and drop them. It's you get to that
right.
point.
That's accurate.
And so, going through your experience playing football, do you remember any coaching lessons that you learned? Maybe you learned from a coach, really a life lesson about yourself or about the world or about, being a man. What was a really good lesson that you learned? And then conversely, did you learn anything like you said, I am never going to do this if I'm coaching kids?
Yeah. So, um, I think the one lesson I learned is, I'm trying to think, from a life lesson perspective. I don't have a ton that I learned, to be honest, from my coaches. Not that they weren't great men or good men. Like, that wasn't my relationship. Now, one, I did have like a vulnerable moment when I was going through something, and I didn't know how to handle it. And for me, it was frustrating. So I reached out to my D coordinator and had a conversation with him, just about some family matters. And he did give me like sound advice. Like, so for me, I think that helped. That, right, like, being able to like have that vulnerable, because in football you always have that vulnerable moment, but like when you have those connections with kids, you want them to feel safe to be with you. And so that was probably one of the things that I remember most from him. And he genuinely cared about the well-being of his players and what you became. So even after I graduated, I would go back and still, like, check in and see how he was doing, and he would always want to know what you're doing and how you do. Are you a good family man, or are you good to the community, etc. So I think that was, like, from a coaching perspective, that was impactful. Um, what I learned is that I wanted to be more of a player's coach, because that fit my personality. Like, I wanted to use um, I wanted to use like my personality really to help people, right? Like I saw that football as an avenue and a tool, and I knew what it did in my life, right? Like it occupied time, first of all, right? Like so that's the one of the best things. It occupied time, helped me with physical fitness, and etc. But if I could take that and then because you're around these kids all the time when you coach, so then you get to know them, right? So if I could get to know them and really build relationships, for me, I use that to steer kids down. Like, what are you interested in life? Because everybody doesn't want to do football for life. So like, what are you interested in? And I would
Right.
try to support and help them, just help them believe in them, and try to push them towards that. So basically, try to pull out potential, and then push them towards it. That's how my coaching was.
And when you have that connection with a coach, knowing that while it's about the X's and O's, it's about making sure that if the running back goes in motion, this player has to shift to this spot, you have to watch for a guard pulling, whatever it is, you have that X's and O's part. But then there's also the life lessons that they're teaching you about discipline, about accountability, about just the broader picture,
Perseverance.
perseverance, right?
You
And
want to quit when you're running. Trust me. You want to
oh,
quit.
absolutely, yeah. and and then they're doing that through those connections that they're making. So the fact that they wanted you to come back and have that lifelong relationship with them, that's what it's truly about. And the reason why I ask is there's so many coaches out there that they coach with fear in mind, that they have
Right.
their program and they will coach and you're afraid to make a mistake because you're worried about the wrath that you will feel from the coach or feeling
Yeah.
shamed or embarrassed. And
Right.
then take it back to the original discussion about the bad boys, the Pistons in the 80s. There was that idea where suck it up, rub some dirt on it, and excuse my language, don't be a pussy.
Right.
Those were things that I remember
Yeah.
hearing, and it
Man
makes
up,
you
basically.
man up, like suck it up. You don't show emotion. You don't. And what that does is it can create when you're shamed. I know for myself playing basketball, there was this experience of being shamed when I didn't perform in a certain way. Like
Yeah.
it manifests itself in a way when I think back on it, it would cause an emotional response.
Right.
When you think about players or students or whoever that have experienced some type of a trauma, something that you are really passionate about is how do we deal with traumas? How do we go about taking those experiences and then making it work in our brain and in our heart? So tell me a little bit about how you got involved with thinking in that way about trauma, and then what do you do? Like, how do you help people that have experienced it?
Yeah. So I actually got involved, or what sparked it was just really personal growth for myself, right? Like I said, like I went through a divorce, like that in itself is traumatic. There are other traumatic things I went through, right, that were hard to unpack. Like I lost kids, so there were things like that bottled up inside. It's like I don't know how to deal with this, right? Like like you said, compounded upon the fact where these emotions are meant to be expressed and worked through, and all I've ever known is to not do that, right? Like all society has ever taught me is men are to repress these things and express. We can express passion, anger, and something like that, but you can't express like grief, sadness, fear, etc., insecurity. Like those are things that are not okay. And so in going through those life changing events, I realized that regardless of what I learned, I needed to unlearn these things because these things were inside of me, and they couldn't stay here. Like it wasn't healthy for me, right? Like from an emotional, from a spiritual, from a physical standpoint, right? Like at some point, if you continue to repress emotions, it eats up the lining of your stomach because your body's in a constant stress cycle, right? So now you have stomach issues that come from this. So all of these things are happening. So I was like, I needed to find a way out. So um, for me, it was writing, right? Like I started writing poetry. Like as I was starting to go through my divorce, like that's when I really kicked up my writing. Um, and it happened to be a very safe space for me, right? Because when you haven't been taught to communicate and that it's safe to communicate, you often don't, right? Because you're fighting through like the aspects of what will people think. But when it came to the pen and the paper, there was no judgment. It was a safe space for me to write. So as I began writing and writing out poems and poetry and my feelings and things like that, I started to have a way to express myself, like so like when words couldn't form is the name of my poetry book, but that was really like what I was living. Like words really wouldn't form until I touched it on paper and they just flow like water. And so through that, like I learned to have like really difficult, allow myself to like do self-reflection, evaluation, you know, dig deep, like what is this? Where does this come from? Like in that, right? And couple it in with my faith and having spending quality time in prayer and things like that. Um, that's how I started down that journey. And what led me to what you said is I started to share some of these poems, which were really private, and people were really, really, at first, like I shared them in a small group because when you're creative, like, and you're not really secure in that yet, it's very, that's you. So if people say like, this isn't good, it's like, oh crap, that's me you're rejecting. So I had a safe group of people who I shared it with, and they liked it, and I kind of expanded on that. And people were like, "Oh, this is amazing! You should share more of this. You should do a book. You should. People will really benefit from this." And I'm like, "No, no, I shouldn't." But as I grew more comfortable, I started to write not just for me, but I wrote things that I thought would help others. And that's how I started on this. And as I started to share that with more and more people, it did help others. Like people would be dealing with depression, discouragement, grief, suicide. Like probably one of the best things I've ever heard is somebody was like, "Yeah, I was suicidal." And yesterday I was thinking I wanted to kill myself, but after reading this poem, like I don't want to anymore. Like I'm like, wow, like that for me is probably one of the best things that I've ever heard. And so that's what got me down is and my desire just to help people because by nature I'm helpful. So you couple that with this ability, and I saw that if I struggled to express myself and I learned, right? Like, and I realized that, you know what? No one taught us like about emotions. Like we talk about school and just even parenting, like there's no class to say, here's emotions, here's how you feel, here's how you're gonna feel in this situation, here's how you might feel. Nobody prepares you for that, right? So everybody's kind of going through life basically figuring it out and doing the best they know how. And I said, well, this is a gap and people need help here. And so I started to focus in on that because I wanted to help people.
You mentioned it kind of in passing, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak about it on a deeper level if you're comfortable with it. You had mentioned, you went through a divorce, but you also said you had lost children,
Yes,
your own children.
my kids.
How many children?
Two.
Two children. Do you have any other children?
Nope.
So did that happen before you went through your divorce?
That did happen before the divorce happened.
So I mean, one, I wanted to offer my condolences to you. I
Oh.
can't imagine as a father, experiencing that, and
Mhm.
um, I'm, my heart is breaking, and I it's tough for me to even grab the words right now to, when
No,
your thing is when words won't form, and if
one of
my
those
pen
moments.
speaks, I want to write down what I'm feeling right now because to have the to be able to pull yourself from that situation in a way where you're able to then take this horrific experience and turn it around to then help other people. I My journey in building men is so much about finding these moments that people go through something
Mhm.
significant in their life, and to go through as a father that experience and then to take it and turn it around and do what you're doing now. I wanted to tell you it's it's one of the most impressive things for me. I mean, it's
Thank
I'm overwhelmed with emotion just talking to you like that. You're able to take from where you were and be able to help people. So just all the credit in the world to you on your journey.
you. Yeah,
It's,
thank you.
so let's go into now. You've gone through this crazy experience. You had to go through that emotionally as a father, and then you're going through a divorce. And
Hmm.
was there a time during that whole experience where you were like, what is life about? What is it about? So how did you get out of that? How did you do that? How did you get away from that mindset? What was it? Was it a person? Was it a poem? Was it the Bible? What was it?
all of the above. So when you're going through a divorce, like you are, so that's probably one of the most traumatic experiences you'll ever have in life because you've built your life with this person, right? So your lives are joined together, your schedules, you're used to talking to them, and then all of a sudden, that's pulled apart. And whoever made the decision, right? Like whether it was the right decision or not, at some point in time, you love this person, right? And so there's still a natural pain that comes from the separation, right? Because you guys were joined, like you had lives that you decided upon. You probably had children. You had, you had joint friends and families. Like so, all of this now has changed. You have to relearn how to live life, right? Depending on how long you were married, it's like this is, I was married almost 10 years, so it's like, man, this is what do I do now, right? And for me, writing was important. Yes, God was important. My faith carried me through it. I had really good supportive pastors. Family was also important. Like, so it was a multitude of things. But as far as like what helped me heal, it was the pen, the paper, having those moments where I allow myself to be vulnerable in my faith to God. I'm like, all right, like I gotta work through this, but allowing myself to see it, right? Like, and honestly, to be truthful, to feel it, like because what people don't tell you is you grieve the loss of relationships. So whether it's a divorce or a best friend leaving or something like that, those are losses that you grieve because that's the end of a relationship. And so you have to allow yourself to grow through it, go through it, and feel what you feel through that, right? And as long as it's not unhealthy, like, okay, like there's stages of grief, right? Like the shock, the anger, the disbelief, the blame. Like, so I had to allow myself to like feel those things and then ultimately realize in writing that, everyone has failed relationships. Doesn't make you a bad person. It just means that hey, you guys gave it a run and it didn't work.
Right.
And God bless both of you.
In my situation, I was married for 17 years
Okay.
when I went through my divorce, and it was almost like I had to relearn who I was. You're
Yes.
connected with this person, and I was not the me that I am today, and I needed to figure out what am I about? What does life mean to me? How am I going to show up for other people in my life and my kids, and how does that all work? And it's almost like you have to go through a rebirth. You have to like come to terms with who you were, really feel through it, and then say, okay, these are things that I honor and I love about myself. These are things that I didn't quite like that man, and these are things that I need to come to terms with, figure out why I was there, and then shed that shit.
You are 100% accurate. I think that, so not I think, but going through it, I definitely, that was my experience. Like you heal, essentially is what happens. And as you heal, like there are parts of your personality that maybe were a little bit more dormant, maybe that were impacted, like depending on the situation, maybe your self-worth wasn't where it needed to be. Maybe self-love needs to increase. So as you start to love yourself now, there you treat yourself different, right? Because you're growing in those areas. And I think that's what happens after something like that. As after you heal from those relationships, um, you look at you have a higher opinion of yourself, which is you need to.
I'm listening to the Jordan Peterson 12 Rules for Life.
Mhm.
It's a 15. I love listening to audiobooks. There's something to the actual reading and like annotating for me. There are some people that I just want to hear their voices as well, and Jordan Peterson is one, and he talks, it's these 12 lessons, and it's a 15 or 16 hour audiobook, and I'm on chapter 2 right now. Each
Okay.
chapter is like an hour and a half long, but he speaks about the idea of self confidence, and he uses the analogy of a wren, a bird, who is one of the most confident creatures in the entire world. It's this little tiny bird that's a badass. It doesn't give a shit about what other people think. And then lobsters, and he talks about lobsters in a way where there's this kind of alpha male lobster, right? And if you get there, if two lobsters get into a fight, when the lobster loses a fight against another male lobster to have dominance over the females in the wherever they are under the water, the lobster that loses, not only do they kind of shed their shell, their brain almost disintegrates and reforms in a passive way. It's almost like it's their brain is telling them that they're not good enough anymore, so it reforms in a way So he's saying, you don't want to ever get to that point where your brain like rewires itself to think that you're not good enough. So he's saying like
Yes.
walk around with your head high, with your shoulders back, even when you've gone through a difficult situation. It's you need to
Yep.
first love yourself and be able to do that. Put your shoulders back, put your head up, and say, "I am good enough. I love me. I am capable." It's not always easy, and I know there were times that I would look like this, slumped over, my head down. You need to look at yourself and believe in the person in front of you. So
Mhm.
as you go through this journey, Brandon, and you're like, you know what, I've gone through this. I've gone through this traumatic experience with my children, with my ex, and now I'm trying to rebuild who I am. Was there was there something that you would do on a daily basis? Was there an affirmation that you would use? Was there something you would wake up every morning and say, you know what? Look in the mirror. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough. And God damn it, people love me. I look back to like the Saturday Night Live episode with Stuart Smalley. That's pulling it out from
Yeah.
pulling deep there. Was there something that you would do on a regular basis that would help you kind of get out of that shit that you were in?
No.
No.
No. I'm not gonna sit up here and
Other
lie
than
to you and tell you that there was affirmation. No. Yeah, no. It was not.
How about
It
any daily routines or rituals? Was it writing every day? Was it working out? Were there any things that you would do just to be like, okay, these are things that I'm going to do every day now?
no.
Nothing. Listen,
So there were
some
some. So
people that
there
works
were.
for, some people it doesn't.
Yeah, there were a combination of things. Here's some of the things that I did. Um, I maybe I didn't do them daily. Spend time with family. Um, like I did pray every day, so I guess there is that. Like I did talk to God, and I tried to tell him about how I was feeling, and I tried to allow myself to see how I was feeling. Um, the Bible reading that, as well as I did start exercising. I would try to do, what I tried to do was little things that were fun for me, like whether that was baking. Like I picked up baking during that time, and now I can bake really great. Um, or whatever it is. Like I started to grow and letting myself do things that were really nice for myself, like treating myself to things like that. Is kind of like I think one of the things that helped me grow in like that self love and um, really looking out for myself.
So when I have the Building Men 2 year anniversary party next summer, and I invite everybody that's been on the show, and I say, bring a dish, bring something with you. What are you baking for the big Building Men party, Brandon? What's your signature?
Depends on what you. I mean, my peach cobbler is elite.
Well, that's what I'm going to ask you to bring with you to the to the Building Men 2 year anniversary celebration is a peach cobbler from
Yes.
Detroit. I mean, that's is there another dish in Detroit that this is like Detroit is about this? Like if you want to eat one meal in Detroit, what am I getting?
Coney Island. You going to Coney Island? Probably a Coney dog and some chili cheese fries. Yeah.
I'm starving right now. I haven't eaten yet today. It's almost noon here in Jersey. I haven't eaten.
Actually, I'm gonna be honest. I actually ate. I wasn't gonna eat, and I said I'm not gonna go on this podcast and be hangry. So I said I made some protein pancakes and some turkey bacon. So, I try to eat healthier. I think we both are, at least aware of our fitness. So I try to put good stuff in my body. But
Yes.
yeah, I had protein pancakes and I wolfed them down really quick because I was like, I can do this and be super hungry, or I can eat and be okay. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I don't have the relaxed meal, but I'm like, I need to eat something.
Yeah, and it's one of my daily routine things that part of my I used to wake up in the morning. My routine was such a mess, and it was more comfort in nature. It was more around, I don't know, it was about being comfortable. I would always get up early, but I would sit on the couch. I'd sit on my ass and drink coffee and watch the news, and I would eat a bagel or a donut, and it just was like sloppy. From the outside,
Right.
it wasn't doing anything to help me be better. And what I try to do now, I mean, you still give yourself little treats here and there, but for the most part, I want to put something to my body that's healthy, that will make me feel a certain way. And you learn to like things. I don't need. I mean, obviously, the peach cobbler next summer is going to be something that I'm definitely gonna try.
Trust me, you'll love it. I've yet to have one person who didn't like it. Yeah.
That's a strong statement. We're gonna have a lot of guests on though. It's gonna be over 100 people by the time we get to this party next summer. So I'm gonna book it now.
If you can see my face and how unbothered I am, that's how confident I am. Yeah.
It's that you walking on the streets. You don't need to smile right now. I get it. I understand.
No,
So
I'm just what I'm telling you is this is
it's the truth.
homemade.
It's the
Like
truth.
from the crust to everything. Like, hey, believe you me.
I'm gonna be out in Wisconsin, so I might even drive there. I might like take a detour through Detroit just to get a taste of that before.
I actually used to cover Wisconsin for work.
Did you? All right.
Actually, so one time I was working with the state of Wisconsin on a deal we were working on, and I actually brought a peach cobbler on a plane, but you can't bring liquid on there, so I had to freeze it solid to
Oh,
bring it on, carry it on, and brought it there, and they loved it too. Everybody in the meeting loved it.
I'm so happy that this happened today because now that's going to be a thing. I'm just going to ask people, what are you bringing? I'll put it on your schedule now. I want to get real quick back into
Mhm.
the when words won't form, my pen speaks, because the healing journey that you've gone on has been you putting pen to paper, unlocking things that were going on in your head and your heart. And it was coming out on, with you writing poetry and writing your book. What is your process? I'm so interested in people's processes as they start something new and they're and exciting and they're going through this new journey. What is your process when you go through that writing? So do you have a specific spot in the house you sit? Do you have a pen that you use? Do you type? Like what does it look like when you're writing?
So I started off when I first started writing. I had like a little notebook and a piece of paper. Honestly, when I first started writing. So now I grab this, got an app on my phone, and I'm anywhere, like anywhere, like, and whenever inspiration comes to me, like I grab it and I write it. Sometimes it's like a line, sometimes I get one line, sometimes I get a thought, or like, oh, I wonder this or this, or I get like two lines, right? And then from that, like I'll write out the two lines, and then the rest will come. Like, so for me, it's very much I'm inspired. I could be inspired by a TV show. Like inspiration comes from everywhere, or maybe I can just be like like wanting to write about me, and then I'm like, I'll write it out. But that's pretty much how the process works for me. It's pretty much based off of inspiration. Like I write everywhere, like in anywhere. So it's not like I need to be in a certain area. It's wherever. Like as long as I got like so my phone is easier than carrying around like a notebook. So and it's a lot easier to transfer it to stuff. So yeah, I started doing it in like a notepad app there. But yeah, that's for me is it's usually how I do it.
A lot of the things that you post on Instagram are these little short clips. It's either a
Yeah.
video of you talking about something, which that's what I mentioned. It seems like I knew you already because
Yeah.
it looked like you were talking just to me. You were telling me about something that I needed to work on in my life, and it was just us having a conversation. And then there's other little. It's on a black background with yellow or white words, and it's you basically it's poetry. And a lot of it is around your mindset, your mental health, and dealing with trauma.
Yeah.
One thing that I jotted down this morning was not wanting to let others help us as a sign of trauma. That was one thing that stuck out to me that you said there. Tell me a
Woo-wee.
little bit about that quote right there.
Yeah. So I talk about being vulnerable, right? So we're gonna have a vulnerable moment here. That was really about me, honestly. And I was having a moment where something had happened to like I was going through something like a family member had gotten sick, and usually I carry a lot of that weight on my own. And I remember driving, and I have a cousin. She's like my favorite cousin. She's basically like my sister. And I'm like, do I call her and talk to her about how I'm feeling? Because part of my journey that helped me in being more vulnerable was I picked two cousins and I said, I'm going to tell them everything. And, because I was naturally very guarded and I had a lot of emotional walls up. So I just, like most people, as they would say, the strong person complex, you hold stuff in and kind of deal with it on your own, right? But the stronger you get, the more you realize your strength comes from letting your guard down and letting others actually in to help. And so this was one of those moments of testing that theory for me. I'm like, do I? And but I ended up reaching out, and I did reach out to her, and I thought about it. I said, people deal with this. I'm not by myself. Like, so I'm like, why don't I put that out? Because a lot of times we've either been hurt, we've had bad experiences with one or two people or more than that, right? And then we put up that wall because there's pain and hurt there. And since there's and it's and you can't provide access because it's tender right now. Like it's like having a sprained ankle. Like when your ankle sprained, you don't want to run on it, right? Because it's tender.
Yeah.
So your body naturally protects it. Well, your body also naturally protects your heart emotionally, right? By constructing those walls. So now that the walls are up because we had a bad experience with people, and the time is going on, we haven't actually like recovered, right? We just, people say time heals all wounds. Well, time doesn't heal all wounds. Time teaches us how to adjust with the wounds we have. Now, time utilized properly with the healing process does heal wounds, but you have to do work. Like if you just put 2, 3 years to go between it, doesn't mean that your wound is healed. But and in order to say is like people go through those things and they essentially allow themselves to be walled off. So they're going to put up constructs like nobody has access to this. And what that means is you protect yourself from that experience, right? I don't have to worry about people disappointing me. I don't have to worry about them like because sometimes we ask for help and you're in a vulnerable position anyway. And then people are like, yeah, I'll help you, but and they throw it in your face or etc. So from that, you're like, I'm not gonna ask for help again. And so we carry that experience. And yes, we protect ourselves from that experience, but guess what? We're also keeping out like amazing people. Like there are some people who will really help us. They have experiences. Like I'll never forget um, reaching out to a friend and he happened he happened to have like experience about something I was experiencing. And he like verbatim told me everything he felt. And it was like literally everything I was feeling at the time. And it was so liberating, but I'd have never had that had I not reached out, right? And so when you don't allow people to help you, that's a sign that you're still carrying like some hurt and some trauma from the past, which is prohibiting you from experiencing really good things in life.
Think about it this way too, Brandon. You mentioned so many people reach out to you, and your words truly inspire them. Your words have helped so many people get through difficult situations. If your cousin called you right now and said, "Brandon, I'm going through a difficult time," you would drop what you're doing and help
Everything.
her, and it would make you feel good going through that. But there are times we don't allow other people, for whatever reason, to feel that same level of like connection to and feeling that larger purpose by helping us when we're going through something challenging. I had a conversation with my girlfriend this morning. She's like, you do so many things for other people, let me help you. Let me help you today. And
Did you let her help you?
I did, and I will continue to. And it's one of those things where I read that quote when I needed to hear it today. I was
Yeah,
like, it resonated with me, and I was just curious what the inspiration for it was. So I appreciate you sharing around that because it hit home to me, and you don't even realize you might put something out there today, and it might not hit someone until next year at this time. But
that's
your
true.
words, when you put them out there in such a way that you are being vulnerable and you're sharing something from inside of your soul, it could truly change someone's life
That's true.
tomorrow, 10 years from now, 100 years from now, something that you're thinking about right now. And you are truly a wordsmith, just the way that you are doing what you're doing. I've loved following along on your journey. It's really been an amazing experience. I'm so looking forward to where you're headed in the future as well, Brandon. I'm happy to have gotten to know you over the last hour or so. The last thing I would say would be, if you had an opportunity, like I started off with the bad boy Pistons, taking it all the way back to the beginning, you're in this kind of tough area, this stoic, you don't show emotion, you push it down, you don't. If you had an opportunity to go back and talk to that 9-year-old Brandon who was creative, who wanted to write poetry and do artwork and perform in plays and be in the Glee Club, if you can give that Brandon a piece of advice, what would you say to him?
I would I would go back, I would give him a hug, and I would just say accept yourself. Um, and don't worry about people who don't. Like, and I know that's tough because you're 9. it's it's tough, to fathom exactly what I'm saying, but you be happy with you. You be proud of you, right? Like that's what matters. Like it doesn't matter what other people think. It matters what you think and what God thinks. And both of you guys are really proud of you. So I would go back and tell them just be you, love you. People will either love you or not like you, but that's not going to take away from who you are. You're amazing. So just keep being that amazing person that you are.
That's beautiful. And then tell him to bet on the Pistons against the Lakers in '89, and don't expect too much out of the Detroit Lions for the next 30 years of your life, right?
Don't ever expect anything out of Lions. for the rest of your life and before your life. They peaked in the 50s. They'll never be back.
I'm sorry I had to go there. I'm a
Yeah, that's okay.
Giants fan right now. It's been a tough couple of years for me, so
You guys have won like 2 Super Bowls, so you don't tough. You don't get to use tough.
I get it. I apologize. That was a cheap shot. So I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and trying some of that peach cobbler. Let us know where we can find you, where we can buy your book. How can the audience of Building Men find Brandon Robinson?
Yes. So on social media, I'm everything at when words won't form. That's me. Words won't form. It's kind of like where I'm at, like words won't form. That's my handle. And you can find my book at www.wordswon'tform.com. And just to make sure that I'm being accurate, I'm going to pull it up. So I'm not actually telling you the wrong thing. Um, but yeah, that should be. I'm looking at my handle now. Yep, words won't form, and then it's wordswon'tform.com. Yep. Everything from Instagram. Instagram is where I am the most. Like I have a Twitter, but I'm usually on Instagram the most. And like you said, they're daily posts that you get. Like honestly, and you know what? I create all of those posts every day, right? Like I try to think of like what would be good, what would help people, and so I usually put something out there, every day to kind of help somebody.
And what I'll do is I'll put all that information in the show notes when people listen to this episode or they watch it on YouTube. They'll be able to click on the links to find the book. I can't wait to read it. And I am, again, looking forward to meeting you in person. For Building Men, you can find us at building.men on Instagram, Building Men Podcast on Facebook. Email me, buildingmencoach@gmail.com. I'll put links in the show notes for YouTube as well. Brandon Robinson, thank you so much, my friend. It was so great to meet you during the last hour or so, and wish you all the best. When words won't form, my pen speaks. Find it on wordswon'tform.com. We will talk to you soon. Go a step further than you thought you can go today, and we'll see you next time on Building Men.